Hello, welcome to our next episode. We are still looking at language and culture. We did look last episode at linguistic anthropology, and now we're going to be looking at language and thought. And then the language and power, I have a TEDx talk that I'm going to put up for that one. Language and power, I could talk about that for hours, so maybe somebody else should talk about it. I don't know. Let me know what you think. So in this episode, we're looking at language and thought. Yeah. We talked about time and money, spending time, wasting time, investing, budgeting, the differences between cultural lenses of whether or not that's even a concept, right? Okay. Because if you sit around the table after dinner and everybody talks for a couple hours, in one culture, that would be valued, and in another, you're wasting time. You need to budget your time. You need to have a certain period of time that you eat and talk to people, and then that's it, right? Okay. So linguistic relativity, and I'll get to the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis in a second. We're looking at differences in how you express gender. So remember the kinship terms. You can also look at gender. Are there 2 genders in your language? 3, 12? Depending on different terms, right? Do some certain nouns have either feminine or masculine? Mostly in English we don't have that, but you can say waiter, waitress, which now would be, I guess they've really gone more towards server, or flight attendant, right? Versus stewardess, steward, which we don't say anymore. Okay, so gender. Tense, it doesn't have to do with stress, really. Tense is past, present, future. Some languages don't have a tense for subjunctive, some don't, or that would be a mood, but it's kind of all into tense. Some don't have past tense. Spatial relationships. Space, do I say northwest corner? Yes, I do here when I'm in Phoenix and Tempe. We use cardinal directions. That's really confusing for some people because they don't know where north is. My husband has no idea ever which way is north. He's a little bit challenged in that area. And then counting. How many do you count? There are a lot of differences among languages. So does this influence our thoughts or how we perceive reality? For example, if you're looking at tense, you're looking at past. If you have no past tense, maybe your language doesn't really view time the same way. Would you be wasting time, spending time, budgeting time Okay. So here we have the Golden Gate Bridge. I've been there. It's gorgeous. Kind of look at it and you think, this is not real. I can't imagine this. Okay, so German, there are differences here in 2 different languages, German and Spanish. In German, the gender of a bridge is feminine because, I don't know, and in Spanish it's masculine. So German people generally give whatever you would consider feminine characteristics to a bridge. Pretty, peaceful, elegant, because all females are pretty. I don't know. Okay. And then Spanish has more masculine, strong, dangerous, sturdy, because it's el puente in Spanish. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis It has to do with linguistic relativism. Language coerces thought. It has a power on your thought process. So I don't know if you agree with that, but I can't hear your answer right now. So, do your thoughts determine your language, or does your language determine your thoughts? If you have another language or even a third language, you think differently. Is that determined by the language? Relating to, it's relative to the language? People's thoughts are determined by the categories made available in their language. Yeah? I always think about this when I'm using my Tupperware. So, after dinner, my kids don't get up and help me clean up because I don't know. I failed at that part of being a parent, but that's okay. So I like to figure out how big the Tupperware is, how big of a Tupperware, how small I need for whatever food I have left, because I like leftovers too. So if the Tupperware is really big, it just bothers me if I have just a tiny piece of something and I put it in a big Tupperware. Like, why? In certain languages, they actually have terms for that. They have terms for something fitting perfectly into where it should be versus having a lot of extra space, which maybe that's time, space, time. What do you think about humans are at the mercy of the particular language they speak? I would say that's all the more reason to study another language so that you can have a different perspective of the world. But whether we're at the mercy of it, I don't know. Linguistic determinism. Whorf suggested that language determines the way we think. Of course, there are people who say this is not true. This is not how it goes. So here's an example, though. The Hopi people, Hopi is a tribe of Native Americans, do not have the past tense of verbs, so they cannot think about the past. And then the counting. Some cultures count differently than others. Can you even imagine that? Counting differently? Yeah, people count differently. And colors. Let's look more. I just wanted to reiterate that. So, if you think that this aunt would call this child here, instead of calling this child a niece, she would call this child a daughter? What does that tell you about their culture, about their cultural lens? Yeah? Let's look at the last one. My father's brother's son. Here am I. My father's brother's son. That's my brother. So again, there's no collateral. How does that affect the way that you view those people and the way that you view family? Does it determine how you act? Here's another. We have the colors. I remember my daughter Susie, who's 15 now, telling me about magenta and how that's not the same as purple. And I think she was like 8 years old. She loves makeup. She does. She loves fashion, and I was like, how do you even know what magenta is? Much less like where it is on the color wheel. Well, some languages, it goes like in levels. Some languages have more terms. In English, with the Crayola crayons, we probably have, I don't know how many terms we have for colors. But so some languages have 2 terms, black or white. 2 terms. How does that relate to how they perceive the world, their values? Yeah. 3 terms, you add red, black, white, and red. Then you have 4 terms, you either add green or yellow for the 4 terms. And then if it's 5, you add the other one, green or yellow, depending on which one you have for the 4. 6 terms, you add blue, and so on. So, you know, when you're writing a document or you're in Word and you want to pick a color for your lettering or something, and you go to this humongous, it's a lot bigger than this usually, with the tiny differences in hues and shades, and you think, how did anybody ever create this? I mean, I think a world of black and white would be so crazy, but then having thousands and thousands is also overwhelming. We can also look at spatial relations, and does that affect the way that, how is that relative to language and the way we think? So distance is either absolute or relative. It's absolute, it's measured in, it's this many miles, it's north, that's absolute, right? Or relative in terms of time, effort, cost, related to where I am right now, it is here, right? Related to how long it's going to take you to be there, that would be time. Effort, again, yeah. So here we have, this is actually confusing, but I want to show you something here. This is relation to spatial aspects, concepts, okay? So this is the example they have in the book about having children sit and look at certain shapes and then turning them 180 degrees and all that. So the idea, this really helped me to see this visual. So first the child sees, or whoever it is, sees the cone and the cube, the A and B, and then you turn the child 180 degrees, and you have these 2 objects. You have a cube and a can. I guess that's what you would call it. It looks like a can. What is the absolute location? What would the relatives red, absolute's blue? So absolute would be, what would absolute be? And what's relative? Here you have a relative solution, that the cone is next to the can, because you go 180 and then 180. Back to 180, right? So the cone is next to the can, that's relative. The absolute is that the cone is to the right of the can. Does that even make sense? This is Dutch language, which is relative, does the relative, and then I don't know how to pronounce that. Zeta is more absolute. So what they're looking at is how does your mind work perceiving where did that cone go, what happened to the cube. The cube was to the right of the cone, and then I turned 180 degrees. Where would the cone need to be? Where would it be? If you have the cube now, so the cube is to the right of the cone, and then I turn 180 degrees and the cube is to the left. Where's the cone? Should the cube be to the right of the cone, then the cone would be to the left of the cube. Or, now you have the can, where is it in relation to the can? Something to think about. Time perception, space perception, color with a U. Does the language we speak shape the way we think? Does it mandate how we think? What are your thoughts? See ya.